Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome back to The Blue Dot podcast, where we shine a light on local voices shaping our communities. And we're focused on the 2026 election and the people who want to represent you. And this is the place to learn about where they stand. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Natalie MacDonald.
And I'm Brian Koehl, and you're absolutely right, Natalie. 2026 is here, and we're thrilled to see so many candidates stepping up across the state. Joining us today is Wilanne Stangel, candidate for Kentucky House District 69, a seat currently held by Republican incumbent Steve Dohm. Wilanne, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks so much, Wilanne. So let's start out with your story. Tell us a little bit about you and what inspired you to run for Kentucky House District 69.
Well, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I've been always involved in the periphery of campaigns, door knocking for other people, and always been interested in running for office, but never was at a point in my life where I could do that until I retired. And I retired and I was ready for retirement, and the invitation came for me to run in the last cycle, and I jumped on it. And here I am again for round two.
So you didn't learn your lesson on the first time around, huh?
No. I only came in second, So
what did you run for before? And can you tell us, I was just curious, what was obviously something was positive about that said, hey, I'm going to try this again. Or what did you see this time around that said, hey, I need to step up again?
Well, I ran for the exact same position as I'm running for now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was necessarily a positive that brought me back, but the fact that the negative has not improved in the situation, it's only gotten worse, and how it's going to impact my family, my community. And I felt obligated to make use of the experience and the contacts I'd made and the steps I had made towards this goal and come back and try it again.
So are you finding that this time around then, in terms of your planning, your strategy, and pulling together a campaign, you've learned a lot from the first time around and it's been a little more streamlined, or you're kind of ahead of where you were last time around? Or
Oh, I think definitely ahead of where I was last time around. I know people, I know faces, I've made contacts with people. My name got out there in the community. I am a lifelong resident of this community, and I have an unusual name. So in a way, my name was out there before, but now it's seen in a different context. And so that's definitely been a plus.
It's great. I mean, we've been listening to people all across the county, and I'm sure you have been too, obviously. So what are the top issues that you've been hearing about that you would want to address if you make it to Frankfort?
Education, affordability, healthcare, and honestly, a focus on Kentuckians instead of a national agenda.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like there's so much chaos going on the national level that we can't even focus on that, right? And there's not a lot that we can do right now and with this election to help that. What we can do is elect local people to our legislature here in Kentucky. So that's a really good point. And I know, you mentioned education. You spent 2 decades in the school system, and we've had a lot of legislation come up that's targeting schools about everything from parental rights to pre-K for all. So I don't know if you have any insight on some of those bills that just went through the legislature and how you would maybe approach those differently or advocate for different bills if you were elected to represent District 69.
Well, obviously, having spent time in education and had a varied career in education. I actually started out in education because of my family situation. The option offered to me was to sub in schools to start out. And so I started out as a outsider coming into sub and starting to see things. And then I went into the actual working as an educator, a library media specialist. And that's a little bit of a different thing as well. And we started talking about rights to information and how we access what's available and how we deprive people of access to availability of resources. So that's a whole thing too. But I worked in private schools and I worked in public schools. And I worked in inner city schools, and I worked out in the country and in the suburbs. So I've kind of had a varied thing, and I've seen a lot about it. And education is under attack. And there's so many things that they're doing to actually try to discourage people from becoming teachers. I mean, they're attacking the pay scales. They're attacking the retirements. They're attacking transportation in terms of getting your kids into school. They're underfunding. They're trying to break the system, and they're coming back when you had Every county in Kentucky voted against Amendment 2, and yet they're still keep coming back and hitting that again and again to try to divert money from public education. And it's easy to convince an uneducated populace to do things that are not in their best interest. And it's also easy to get by as an employer to pay an uneducated populace a lower wage. And so I think there's incentives for a certain group of people to try to dismantle education, but there's certainly an incentive for the rest of us to make it better. I have children, they're adults now, but I have grandchildren coming along. And what they're doing in education is tragic. And it's going to affect generations that come if they get away with it. And it's just a huge issue.
Yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, we're trying to talk about these books because so many people don't know about them. And I think, as you said, Wilanne, one thing that I'm seeing across the state and across the nation when we talk about things is people want to support education. And I think a lot of people aren't, political nerds like maybe some of us are, and don't follow these bills. So they don't know this is happening. They don't know, who's trying to take away what, who's saying, no, we don't need maternity leave for our teachers, or no, we don't want to fund our bus system. I think getting that word out there, and that's exactly going back to your point about keeping things local and really talking about the things that are affecting us here in Kentucky. So it's a good point.
Well, and even like the retirement systems and things like that, and this pay scales. Looking at another big crisis in this area, and a lot of areas, the housing shortages and the affordability of housing. And the average teacher working 5 years or less in this area cannot afford housing in this area. Well, how are you going to attract people, good quality people in education, if it's a job that they can't afford to live and raise their own family on? And that has an impact. It goes downhill. It's the rock that rolls down the hill. And you start at the top, and if you keep pushing the rock down, pretty soon you're at the bottom. And Kentucky has always been in the bottom tier of education, and there's no reason for it. And Governor Beshear's pre-K for all is a huge step for a lot of reasons, that it would take us up a notch in education. And the fact that we're fighting that is just ridiculous. And I feel like I have a particular dog in that fight. When I first got divorced and I had to start out making a living, I had a son who was in school at the time who has special needs, and I had a preschool daughter at the time.
Wow.
Education, having a quality education available for my son was paramount to what I needed. But it also limited me in terms of my ability to work, because there was no aftercare program available for my special needs son. He couldn't come home and stay home alone, be a latchkey kid. There was no before school care. There was no summer vacation, Christmas vacation. There was none of that available for him. So I had to work a system that mimicked his. And the same thing for my daughter. When she was preschool, I had to not only find a job to support us, but I had to find something that would pay for her childcare. And all of those factors, if you take that burden off of families, if you provide pre-K for all, not only is the child care there that frees them up to get good quality jobs for themselves, but also the education advantage of having these kids start in preschool. They're ahead of the game by the time they get into kindergarten and get into first grade. It's a win-win for working families all the way across the board. It would have made a huge difference in my life. And quite honestly, in my initial career, I was in industrial management and production. I couldn't do that job and follow a school schedule. So it threw me into this. But had I had that pre-K availability, that childcare availability, that would have economically given me an advantage that I could have taken my family ahead sooner. Luckily, the only option for me at that time was become a teacher. Luckily, I wound up being a profession that I really loved. But that's not the case with everybody. That's not an option with everybody. And so that pre-K for all is just a win-win all the way across the board.
Yeah, I think that's, I was interested in the pre-K for all. Republicans were for it when they had a Republican governor, but now that we have a Democratic governor, they don't want to give Democrats a win. I mean, that is the type of divisiveness that's, ends up with us having a government that's not serving our needs. We're voting in people who have our best interests as the top of mind. So you mentioned also the housing and affordability aspects of it. Can you drill down to that a little bit more, and what else are you seeing, and what would you want to work on in the legislature do you think would benefit your constituents?
Well, housing is a huge issue, but also that has a lot to do with wage earners. The average wages in a lot of areas are not sufficient. I mentioned school teachers. These are people they at least have bachelor's degrees. They're educated people. Most of them are working on master's degrees, and they can't afford the average housing in the communities where they're working. We can't have wages cannot stay down like they are. And we are concentrating so much of our wealth at the top of the scale. And we're making sure that we have tax incentives and tax breaks that disproportionately benefit people in the upper tier. And the lower tier has no path to get ahead. They have no path to even out that scale. And you see so much more other community issues that arise from that. If you have a housing shortage, if you have affordability shortage, if you have food shortages, medical care shortages, you have an increase in crime. You have an increase in children repeating the cycle of not being educated enough or cared for well enough to thrive on their own. It's a regressive system. And that's what we're investing in, a regressive system for the benefit of people that already are doing quite well. And it ultimately, when they're going to be looking for qualified workers for their positions, we're already falling in terms of manufacturing and engineering kind of things. We're failing in that, not just in Kentucky, but in nationwide. We're having a hard time finding qualified candidates to meet some of these jobs. We have to invest in that now at the lowest levels of education and in our middle and lower class, working class communities. You can't get ahead as a country, as a civilization, if you undermine your foundation. And that's what we're doing.
I love the way you said that we're investing in regressive policies, right?
Yes, regressive situation.
System,
we're going backwards in what we're investing in.
And that's why we're progressives, right? We're looking towards the future. So you just talked about, you talked a little bit about education. It was your first one. And then you talked about housing. You also mentioned healthcare. So that's kind of the trifecta. So talk a little bit about that healthcare piece of it and what you'd like to address there.
Well, we talk about the Affordable Care Act, and that's become a boogeyman now. And I remember when that came in, and that was a salvation for my family. The idea that you had pre-existing conditions, and especially for workers when you had to change jobs frequently, which a lot of people do. And even if you had insurance coverage with your new job, that pre-existing condition, you had to wait a year or so before it would qualify for anything. And once again, I remember back in the day with the special needs child, my then husband, every time he worked at the kind of medium-sized companies, every time they came up for their insurance contract renewal, they would use the fact that they had a child with special needs on their list to bump up the cost for the entire company. Now, this was not a child that had complex medical needs. He's on the autism spectrum. But they would use that excuse and it would bump up the entire company. And my husband would have to be looking for another job because they would get rid of him. It was foolish for them to keep him. And then the problem was my other son, who had severe asthma, had to wait a year and a day without treatment for his asthma before he would be covered for his pre-existing condition. The Affordable Care took that away. Once again, it opened up a chance for workers to get ahead and workers to thrive and families to get ahead. And we start backing off on those things. And once again, we're in the regressive situation where we're trying to go back to the serfs and oligarchs.
Right. Well, and it's so frustrating because, and I don't remember the exact number, but when we're spending $1 to $2 billion a day in Iran right now, and there's been so many people, mostly Democrats, who have come out to say, well, let's see what else we could be doing with that money, right? With the big ugly bill, cutting health care and, we're getting rid of the Department of Education and, SNAP benefits, et cetera. And you talked about the ACA credits. I think 10 days of the war could have paid for the ACA credits for this period of time. It's just the priorities are completely upside down right now. And we need to turn that around.
Once again, what the amount of that people lose in their workforce for absenteeism, for illnesses where they're caring for themselves or their children or their parents, all those kind of things. If you come into work and you're dragging into work and you're sick, you're not productive. You're not making good decisions because you don't feel well. There's long-term costs that people don't ignore. Having a healthy, educated workforce that can live and not be thinking about where their next meal is coming from or what roof is going to be over their head tonight makes a better worker. It makes a more competent worker. It makes a more successful operation, business, whatever. We need to invest in it.
I'm sure when you talk to the unions, they agree with that.
Yeah. Yes. And, and I'm totally about the unions because they're out there working and they're being demonized in a lot of cases because
Right.
the people that want to pay low wages and want to abuse their workers are motivated to not have unions. The unions make the case that a better educated, healthier, better paid workforce. And you're not retraining people all the time. If you're paying them decently and treating them decently, they're not quitting every 6 months. They're earning experience, getting better at their job, and making it a better, more efficient and productive business, company, corporation, whatever, work site.
Yeah, and so I think again we can rally around a lot of these issues, and I feel like we all have commonality in that, but I think a lot of people are very disconnected from politics. They don't want to get involved, or they just there's too much going on, like you said, at the national level. So how do you feel that you can engage voters and really ensure their voices are heard in the whole legislative process, and get people to rally around and come out and vote and back you and in your vision?
Well, for one thing, I've lived this life. I've lived this life. I've been the caretaker, my mother's only child, when she had dementia, and I had to work through finding care for her and affording care for her. These Medicaid cuts they're talking about. A lot of people don't realize that Medicaid is the primary funding for most nursing home care. Where do you send your mother with Alzheimer's if you can't put her in? You can't afford
Right.
to send her somewhere that costs $6,000 or $7,000 a month. I'd come back to the idea that I have lived this and I know what they're going through and I know what makes it better and I know what makes it worse. And I know my own family has suffered or gained, but depending on what people down in Frankfurt do, what people in Washington do, and the gaslighting of turning us against each other for issues that are not real pertinent to our lives, so that we get distracted from the fact that, the big issues are getting ignored or underfunded or whatever. And I think when you talk to people and you make them understand that you're not coming in, like I'm not coming in as somebody who's, flying to Paris to do my fashion shopping or whatever. I'm coming in as somebody that just actually lives here and has lived here. I've taken care of my family. I've taken care of my mother. I've taken care of my son. I've taken care of my grandchildren. And they're doing the same thing. And they need to have people that are fighting for them, not fighting to boost the profit margins of huge corporations and a national agenda that really has very little to do with what's happening in Erlanger and Ellesmere and Florence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, everybody talks Democrats. Well, a lot of people talk about we need more people like me, more people like us in our government. We talk a lot about Citizens United and, all the dark money, especially at the national level, that makes it really, you have to have a lot of money to be able to run for office. And then here we are with your exact lived experience that you just spoke about. I mean, when you talk to your voters, you are, they can share that. That probably resonates with your voters and the people you talk to, because a lot of them have, those same kind of challenges, have lived those same kind of lives. So, Wilanne, you have a primary challenger. Can you tell us what sets you apart from your primary challenger? And also the Republican incumbent, Steve Doan.
Well, my primary challenger is a young man. He's a great guy, very interested in this community. I think the thing that sets us apart is the fact that I have been in this community for my entire life, that I'm fully vested in this community, and I have experience in this community, and I have name recognition in this community. People know me. They know I've worked in this community. I've lived in this community. I've raised my children in this community. And I'm sure with time, maybe he'll be the same way, but he is not at this point. That's the difference. That's a difference there. My opponent, who was my opponent last time, Mr. Dunn, his big legislative accomplishments here recently is we can have chickens in our yards in Erlanger. But if you can't afford a house and a yard, what good is it to have chickens?
Right.
So that's putting the cart before the horse. Make sure people can afford a home with a yard before you make sure they can have chickens. And his second big thing, apparently today the news broke, is he's down there intervening in the Matt Bevin divorce case. So there's a lot of, kind of hate this word, but toadying to the national party. And we've seen that in all of Northern Kentucky, where we look to what some of these national politicians are doing. And we're so busy currying favor with them and making sure that their agenda goes forward and making sure that we have a name associated with them, rather than making sure that the people in Erlanger, Ellesmere, Florence, Crestview Hills, that they have what they need. It's all well and good that Donald Trump has what he needs, or Massey has what he needs, or Rand Paul, or whoever, whatever. That's great. If the people in this district don't have what they need, then it's a wasted effort.
You know, when you talk about Steve Doan, it's interesting because I'll talk to people and say, who's your representative? And I will tell you, people do not know Steve Doan represents them. They don't see him. They don't hear from him. He's nowhere to be found. And so I think that goes back to you having that lived experience, living in the community, caring about the community, and you've been so intricate in your involvement in the community that I think that'll make a huge difference. So when you do get to Frankfurt, though, you'll have to work across the aisle with some of these people, right? So what do you think would be your strategy to be able to, and you mentioned it earlier, you know, we need to work together. How do you feel you could do that with some of the Republican colleagues in the legislature?
Well, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be challenging
Yeah.
because we do have such a political divide right now. But when it all comes down to it, Steve Down lives in this community. He has children. He has a wife. He has, I believe his wife may be a teacher. It's in his family interest and in his neighbor's interest and his supporters' interest that we are successful as a community and that Kentucky is looking at the needs of our community. And just have to reach out to these people and say, at some point, and we're starting to see this in national politics, people are turning away from this MAGA agenda to a certain extent. And we're starting to see people like Thomas Massey and like Rand Paul kind of backing away from, and, you know, and our Northern Kentucky state representation is very tightly aligned with us, particularly Thomas Massey. So they're starting to realize on a national level that what they've been putting forward is not there. And at some point, what they have to recognize in Frankfurt, that what they're putting forward is not working and it's going to turn on them. And we have to make it like, hey, you can be the savior in your area, or you can be the villain. So it's in your interest to at least listen to what we have to say and address it.
Yeah, it seems like if we can, you know, just have a great showing in 2026 midterms, and I think some Republicans will go, okay, this is the turning point. Well, this road we've been going down. Yeah, they have to know this path is harrowing. Subscribing to Trump's agenda and his view of the world, and they're going to run into a brick wall at some point, and I'm hoping that's in November of 2026. And then that will help you be able to start working across the aisle. They'll be more amenable to that because they see that as their survival is going to depend upon it. And leadership often comes down to just the values. So what principles guide you as a candidate, and how do they influence your approach to governance?
I think I was my mother's only child, and I'm kind of biased, but I think my mother was one of the best people I ever knew. And my mother taught me that everybody matters. Everybody matters. And I distinctly remember one time when I was a kid, we were driving somewhere. It was very hot, and that was before everybody had air conditioning and yada, yada. And there was this older black gentleman walking down the street. He looked a little disheveled, and it was like 100 degrees outside. And my mother pulled over and said, you know, sir, where are you going? And he was obviously confused. And so she put him in the car, and she took him to somewhere that was air conditioned, got him cooled off, found out enough about him to figure out where he came from. He was over from Cincinnati. And she took him and put him on the bus, paid his bus thing. In fact, got hold of his family, said he's coming on the bus to here, you know, and even talked to the bus driver. And some of my mom's friends were so appalled that she had done this. This is a stranger. He's, you know, he's a black man. He's disheveled looking. He looked kind of dirty. You know, why would you do that? And my mom's like, I would want somebody to do that for my family. And that's what it's all about. We have to want for everybody what we want for ourselves and our own families. That's what it boils down to, as far as I'm concerned.
That's the golden rule. That's the basis of everything.
Absolutely.
That's a great story too, man. Your mother must have been quite a person.
She was also a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat.
Yes.
When it came time, my now ex-husband, obviously, but my husband, we were early married. He'd gotten out of the military. We moved home. We were staying at her house and trying to find a house of our own and so forth. And he was going to register to vote. My mother called me to come upstairs and talk to her. And she said, is he going to register to vote? And I said, yeah. And she goes, how's he going to register? And I said, I don't know. She said, he registers as a Democrat or he moves out. There
I
you go.
love it.
If you're going to be living under her roof for a little while, right? You do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's
Mama's
awesome.
rules.
That's awesome. No, that is a great story. And I love this when we get to kind of learn a little bit more about you and who you are, what makes you and guides you. We also do a lightning round with all of our guests to get to know you a little better, if you would be up for that.
Sure.
Let's give you 5 quick questions. The first one's very easy.
Okay.
Who was the most famous person you've ever met?
Hillary Clinton.
Oh,
When did you meet her?
I met her at a fundraiser, I guess when she was running for the presidential nomination, and had an opportunity to actually talk to her and exchange a few words with her, and it was a big moment.
bet.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's a good
I
one.
would love that.
This one's not quite as serious. Oh, what is your favorite fast food?
Well, I'm not a great foodie, but it has to have something to do with probably ice cream of some kind. I really ice cream, some kind of ice cream place.
See, I'm weird because all of my friends, they're like, oh, Graders is the best. Graders is the best. I'm like, give me soft serve, or there's like this brand called Turkey Hill. It's like this cheap little brand of ice cream. Like, that is the best. Give me
But
it does not have to
as
be
long
Graders
as there's
for me.
ice cream involved, I'm there anyway.
It doesn't matter.
But Graders is a personal favorite.
Yeah.
Now, do you
Pretty
dip
good.
into gelato? Because golden gelato is the best gelato in all of the land.
No, if it's not full fat and it's not got the full ice cream, no, we're not going there.
Okay. You like what
It's
you
all
like.
or nothing. I love it.
Love it. Okay. If you had the opportunity to time travel, would you go back in time or would you go to the future?
Back in time.
And then I think we just answered this question. It was, do you prefer salty or sweet snacks? But I'm pretty sure that's going to be ice cream.
It's going to be sweet, yeah. I have to maintain this figure somehow.
That's what keeps you so sweet, Wilanne.
That's it.
It took a lot of work to get that figure.
That's right. Dedicated effort took me to where I am today.
That's right.
And then lastly, who was the politician who influenced you the most, good or bad?
I would say not necessarily. Well, I do remember a little bit because I was a small child and hearing about this. I'm going to say LBJ.
It's a good one.
LBJ came from a background that you would not think that he would have cared about a lot of the people that he did.
Mhm.
And he bucked a Southern system that was kind of regressive to do what he thought was the right thing.
He's a very
agree.
he's a very interesting president for exactly that reason. He was kind of crass and not
Yeah.
exactly PC, but then he went, like you said, out of the box of what you would have expected. I have his autograph behind me down there. I can't reach it.
Oh, ooh.
Going out. But awesome. Well, there you go. Those weren't too bad, right? You survived that.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Well, Wilanne, we sure appreciate you joining us, and thank you for sharing your story and your vision. And the story about your mom was great. It really says a lot about your roots and your values. We really appreciate that. So, where can listeners learn more about your campaign and get involved?
Well, they can go to my Facebook page. They can go to my website, Wilanne, WILANNE, the number 4 KY, Wilanne for Kentucky.
Wilanne for KY. All right. That's great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck, and we'll be, rooting you on and following your campaign.
Thank you much.
Thanks so much. And that's it for this candidate interview. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts or exclusive material. And don't forget, you can join the conversation at our Facebook and Instagram pages or at bluedoutpodcast.com. Until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, and never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everyone.